What is up, everybody? So, contrary to what was kind of seeming like it was going to happen, what seemed like it was about to happen, it was about to go down, it looks like Kyle Lowry is actually going to stay with the Toronto Raptors, which is hella surprising to me personally. And hello, Parker White. Wow. So, this is this is not something that I thought was coming by any means. I thought based on the moves that Toronto was kind of doing today, where Matt Thomas was traded for a second round pick, Terrence Davis was traded for a second round pick, it seemed like the Toronto Raptors were clearing up roster spots to potentially, make that trade. And yes, Parker White, as of Woj, about let's see, how many minutes ago are we talking? As of 9 minutes ago, Woj did tweet out that Kyle Lowry is going to stay with Toronto past the deadline. Um, but the thing is, I don't think it's for a lack of trying. I do think it seems like the Toronto Raptors did really want to move him today, but just the deal didn't get done, which is really interesting to me. I think at the end, the asking price for Kyle Lowry might have been too much for the teams involved to meet. You saw the first team in the day. I mean, of the major teams linked to the Raptors, let's talk about it, right? So the first team that kind of seemed to back out of the equation was the Philadelphia 76ers, where they went and acquired George Hill earlier today. And I think in my head, as soon as that kind of registered, as soon as that George Hill trade went through, I think that was the explanation mark, like lights going off, everything that Kyle Lowry was not going to Philadelphia. That deal was off the table and they moved on somewhere else. And they did, right? The next one was obviously the Clippers. And while they never really had a big stake in this, in terms of their actual chances to secure Kyle Lowry based on the assets that they had, I think as soon as you saw the Clippers go after Rajon Rondo, I thought that was the signal that it's like, cool, the Clippers are out of the situation. And at the end, it seemed like there was a deadlock, I would say, between the Lakers and between the Miami Heat in terms of who was going to acquire Kyle Lowry. And at the end of the day, it ended up being neither. Kyle Lowry stays a Raptor. And it's a really interesting development because, again, I talked about the roster spots being cleared up. And I think just ultimately both those teams just weren't willing to meet the asking price that Kyle Lowry was coming with. For the Lakers, well, this is something Shams reported, but for the Lakers, apparently the throw in on their end that they would not budge on was Talon Horn Tucker being included in the trade that would come to Toronto. And the Lakers refused to budge on Horn Tucker coming to Toronto. So that deal didn't go through. Then for the Heat, Tyler Harrow, Tyler Harrow, Tyler Harrow. That's the name that we've consistently heard the Messiah was pushing for, and it didn't happen. Pat Riley refused to go after or to give up Tyler Harrow to go after Kyle Lowry. And at the end of the day, you saw it. They immediately turned around. They went and got Victor Oladipo instead of Kyle Lowry. So the Miami Heat just took themselves out of the equation because they thought the asking price was too high. So it leaves Toronto in a weird situation, I think, because now obviously you're running the risk of Kyle Lowry potentially leaving the team in free agency, which I'll get to more in depth. But I just think it was weird. I think Toronto anticipated they were going to have a trade because naturally, I don't think you move Matt Thomas and Terrence Davis for pennies on the dollar unless you expect to be bringing in other guys and expect to have an extra player coming in for what you're sending out and have the extra roster room. So I think Terrence Davis and Matt Thomas being traded really indicated that. But I think ultimately, maybe even Masai was a little surprised that no teams kind of followed suit and no teams ended up pulling the trigger on the Kyle Lowry trade based on what Masai was asking for. So where are we now? So now you have a 36-year-old as of today, by the way. Not that Kyle Lowry will ever see this, but happy birthday, Kyle Lowry. As of today, Kyle Lowry turns 36, and he's going to be a free agent in the offseason. So does he stay past this season? And hello, Lazerbot. um, I don't know. I honestly don't know if he does stay past the offseason. It's really interesting because obviously we all know how much Kyle Lowry loves Toronto. We all know that in his heart he will always be a Raptor. He talked about it in the press conference that he had, where he said whether it be a one-day contract or whatever the case, he wants to retire with Raptors. That's what we know. That's what he said. But at the same time, I'd be lying to you if I remember exactly where I read the report. Actually, no, I do recall. I remember listening to a podcast on The Ringer where they were talking about the fact that Kyle Lowry was seeking somewhere around a 30 million a year contract in the offseason. If you're the Raptors, are you going to give that to Kyle? Because by all means, they're going to have cap space. That is not the issue at all. The issue is Kyle Lowry's 36 years old. Your young core is more or less around, I'd say, like between like 25 to 27. Does Kyle still fit with the team going forward? And that's a decision they're going to have to make in the offseason. And it's not going to be an easy one by any means because we all know Kyle Lowry's legacy here. We all know he's absolutely beloved in Toronto. Just, I don't think anybody in Raptors history holds a candle to Kyle Lowry and in terms of the kind of adoration that our fans have for him. But the NBA is a business. This is something I talk about all the time on my channel. The NBA is a business, and as a business decision, paying Kyle Lowry 30 million for 2 years, um, I'm not saying it's the wrong decision because he can be a fantastic mentor for this team going forward regardless, and obviously Kyle Lowry is just a natural winner, but I don't know. The thing is, there doesn't seem to be a lot of great ways to use cap this offseason as the free agency class has obviously dissipated after Giannis signed his extension, after Paul George signed his extension, and Rudy Gobert, a bunch of other guys picked up contracts. And that's actually an interesting comment Lazar bought. Bring DeMar back actually is something that's personally crossed my mind. It's really funny because the player that DeMar DeRozan left Toronto as versus the player he is now is actually, I don't want to say vastly different, but there are significant enough differences that I think DeMar is almost a better fit with the Raptors now than he was back then. I think the one thing that DeMar has truly benefited from in his time with the Spurs is he's really grown his game as a passer and he's been tremendous in terms of that development, and that has served the Spurs well. Obviously, they're in good seeding. They have a chance to make the playoffs out west with the team that they have, coupled with the young guys that they have around DeMar. But I don't know. Here's the thing: if you're bringing DeMar back, and let's say you bring Kyle back in the offseason, you get into a situation where you have a team that is good enough to make the playoffs by all means. And to answer your question, Lazarbot, no, the trade deadline would have passed as of 3 p.m. today. The only situations in which trade reports could still be going down right now is if teams were quote unquote priorly engaged to the 3 p.m. deadline. If that phone call was started before 3 p.m., then that trade can still be broken as news past the 3 p.m. deadline. But at the moment, as far as I know, I don't think that's anything that was on the tables for the Raptors. I'm just going to update all my tweet notifications real quick to see if there's any big news regarding the Raptors, but there has not been. They gave the trade details actually for the Victor Oladipo trade to Miami, and it's Depot for Avery Bradley, Kelly Olynyk, and a draft spot swap, which is obviously a lot cheaper than Kyle Lowry would have come. But yeah, as of now, the deadline's passed, and it seems like the Raptors are obviously done making moves. And again, I think they were truly anticipating to get something done at this deadline. I don't think you make those minor trades unless to clear up roster spots. Otherwise, so now you're sitting there and you're just thinking, what now? Because this team is still good enough for the most part to compete for a playoff spot, or at least for the play-in tournament that they have this season with the 9 and the 10 seeds. Oh, but you lose out on playoff seeding, or sorry, on draft positioning in that sense, right? And again, I will bring it up one more time. This is why I hate the kind of middle of the pack position, because I talked about this in my previous video that I posted on this channel, not the Norman Powell video that I did live today, but the one where I actually sat down and recorded. If you're the Raptors and you make it into the playoffs and you get bounced, say, by the Sixers, by the Nets, by the Bucks, whoever it is in the first round, that actually that's a really unfavorable position for your team because you lose out on draft positioning. There's no real players on your team that are just tremendously benefiting from playoff experience. For the most part, the core that you have, with the exception of Gary Trent Jr., who's coming in now for the Norman Powell trade, they've all been deep in the playoffs and they've all won a championship. Obviously, and even Trent has gone deep with the Portland Trailblazers. So if you make the playoffs, say on the play on with the play in tournament, or you just snag like the 8-7 seed naturally, whatever the case is, you show up, you get eliminated, and then you're back to square one, right? And this would have been a lot easier of a situation if, guys like huge free agent names that were supposed to be there were still there on the table, because then you make the easy argument that okay, the Raptors stay competitive and Giannis is there in the offseason, and you make the pitch to him that hey, look how good we are. Without you, think about how good we can be with you on this team. But Giannis isn't there on the board anymore. Hell, not even a Paul George. The biggest name still left in free agency, technically speaking, is Kawhi Leonard. And is Kawhi Leonard really going to leave that situation in LA? Probably not. I mean, I think there's a slim chance that if the Clippers really are bad enough and underachieve enough, in the playoffs this season, that maybe Kawhi actually seriously sits down and considers, leaving the Clippers. But for the most part, I think he's going to be with the Clippers for the long haul. So there's not a game changing name in free agency this year. Again, it's been alluded to. You can go chase somebody like a DeMar, but that really locks you into, say, the lower seeds in the Eastern Conference for a while, and you're just kind of, I guess, biding your time until the next big free agency, which isn't the worst thing. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I think you want to be building towards the future. I don't think bringing in old aging veterans, which I mean, Kyle and DeMar kind of, I guess, would be considered at this point. I don't know if that's the best approach to necessarily keep building your team forward, as much as everybody in Toronto loves both those guys. I don't know. I personally, not that I would ever root for a team to lose, but I'd like to see the Raptors get good enough positioning where they could maybe trade up and go get Evan Mobley. That's a guy I've been super high on personally for the Raptors, because they have the obvious need at the big man position, where they're currently playing Pascal there now, and they might still be playing him there going forward. But yeah, it's just they don't have a good situation at the big man. Evan Mobley is one of the most exciting prospects in this draft. And I think, in the all likelihood, if the Raptors don't get the number one pick, which it's a small chance that they do, and get Kate Cunningham, Mobley is the guy I think to pursue for the Raptors. And to answer your question, Lazarbot, all that was all that Woj said about the pick was it was just a future second round pick from the Jazz. So it's not really a high value pick by any means. I think the Raptors just wanted the extra draft capital, and again, we're potentially clearing up a roster spot. But yeah, both Terrence Davis and Matt Thomas were sent out for second round picks, so you didn't get a huge haul for either of them. And I also find it really funny that of all teams, Sacramento actually ended up picking up Terrence Davis, because you already have De'Aaron Fox, you already have Buddy Hield, you already have Tyrese Halliburton. You just got DeLon Wright the other night, and now you add Terrence Davis into the mix. How many how many guards does one team need? I just I don't get it. That I was just laughing away at that one, because I'm just sitting there. I'm like, where are you going to find the playtime for all of these guys that are quality players? So that's just I don't know what the Kings are doing there. But then again, the Kings still have Luke Walton on staff, so like Lord knows their management doesn't have anything figured out. Like how is that guy still employed? What kind of blackmail does he have on the Kings organization? That's what I want to know. But going back to the Raptors, Sorry. Um, yeah, we lost depth. John Doe. We lost depth and Norman Powell. I think if we want to talk about the Norman Powell trade, I think with that one, it was more so a situation where it seems like he wasn't in the future plans for the Raptors. I think this is a situation where the money that Norman Powell is probably going to ask for is not something that Masai seemed like he was willing to pay. And Lord knows with the year that Norman Powell has had this year, he could be commanding around 20 to 25 million easily. So so you have a situation here where I guess cap flexibility was the priority and knowing that he Masai wasn't planning on retaining Norman Powell. He decided to move for Gary Trent Jr., who's younger. He's having a good season. Like, I had a little bit of time to kind of sit with this. When I made the original video talking about the Norman Powell trade, I wasn't necessarily a huge fan because there was no draft pick compensation whatsoever. But, having a chance to sit with it for like an hour while waiting on the Kyle Lowry news to break, which obviously never did, I actually like the Gary Trent move a little bit more. I think he has a chance to develop. It like worst case scenario, you trade Norm for a younger Norm. That's kind of what I look at here. And I think Gary Trent can do a lot of the same things that Norm can, and he's younger, and you have control of him on a rookie contract naturally. So I really think that's what they were going for. I'd be interested to see what's going to happen from here on out, whether or not the Raptors are going to go in on this season and see if they can do anything because Andre Drummond just got bought out by the Cleveland Cavaliers. That was another piece of news that was broken by Woj earlier today. I would anticipate with the fact that LaMarcus Aldridge wasn't wasn't traded, he's going to be bought out. So I'd be interested to see if the Raptors bring in one of those two guys. I imagine both those guys, the bigger priority would be going to a contending team and going to a team where they can win the championship. But you never know. I think somebody will bite from the contenders on signing those guys, but if they don't, it might not be the worst move in the world to take a flyer on those guys. I mean, for those of you that keep up with me, I'm not a fan of Andre Drummond. I think he's hella overrated. But if the Raptors see something in him that they could potentially develop, full power to them. Yeah. I see like an outpouring of comments coming in. I don't know if I'd go as bad as a D minus in terms of the grade for what the Raptors have been doing, but I think they could have done better. I think situations could have been handled better. Again, I really expected Kyle to get dealt today. I'm shocked that he's still on this team. Do I think Gary Trent could put up 43 points on 18 shots? Yeah, maybe not at this point in his career now, but if I'm not mistaken, and I'm just going to double check this real quick, I think Gary Trent is still 21 years old, if I'm not wrong, 22 years old. So again, worst case scenario, I think you're getting a younger version of Norm. And here's for the Raptors too. I don't think the Raptors are in a position like, say, because I see getting brought up in the comments, like the Rockets, like the Magic, where they had to do a complete blow up of the situation and tear it down as much as they could. I think the Raptors are obviously they have a good core in place. They have pieces. They just need kind of the piece. And honestly, in my opinion, I think they need that one guy to just really and truly take them over the top, which is why I think cap flexibility is something that, Masai is prioritizing because he wants to be a player in free agency. And obviously, we know Toronto is in a quote unquote free agent destination. But I want to say it's been I want to say it's been moving in that direction a little bit. I think you've seen kind of like little pieces of it. Back when LaMarcus Aldridge had his free agency when he was still a top commodity, the Raptors were on the short list of teams that LaMarcus Aldridge sat down with and talked to. So, he was considered a big free agent at the time, and he was considering the Raptors. So I do think they're slowly working towards, you know, bigger status as free agency players. And I think they should have a chance to capitalize that in the future. I thought it was really funny actually. I don't remember her exact handle, but there was a good tweet put out from Kate. For those of you that are on Raptors Twitter, you'll recognize her. She's pretty funny in my opinion. I think she's great. Um, there was a tweet asking what the Raptors could do to kind of like elevate their status to a free agent destination. And Kate pitched the idea that like having a separate hub for the players to like come through so they don't have to go through customs every time they travel between the States and America would go a long way. And honestly, I completely agree. As far as kind of like little rumors and like little pieces here and there that you hear from the players, that is something that is brought up in terms of like a complaint of playing for the Raptors. And I think another one, honestly, and this is not something that can really be changed, but I have a friend of mine who was playing different sport, but he's playing football, or he was playing football in the States. He was playing in the NCAA. He's back in Canada now, playing for the CFL. And having talked to him, and obviously, his kind of like inner circle a little bit more in terms of the NCAA ballers and stuff like that, I do know a big turnoff from playing in Toronto and playing in Canada specifically is the really high taxes that are here compared to in the States. Because let's be real about this, Canada does obviously have higher taxes than America does. And I think in that sense, you get situations where, say, you have somebody like Kyle Lowry and you have somebody like Pascal Siakam that you can look at their contracts and be like, maybe they're a little bit overpaid, but you almost have to do that because of the what's called because of the taxes that are here. Whereas those are the kinds of like small things that I think give, say, places like Miami a natural advantage. On top of being just like a great weather city, Miami also has no state tax, which I think goes a long way in free agency decisions for a lot of players. I think you saw that with when you had the big three era. I mean, obviously they wanted to just play together in general, but I think part of what made it more stomachable to take smaller deals was the fact that they weren't going to lose so much money to the big state tax. And then obviously to bring this all back with Canada, obviously you have some really high taxes. And you might think it's kind of stupid, for these millionaires to really be thinking about like losing millions and whatnot. But, they have people, sorry, to lose millions when they're making so much money, but they obviously have people to take care of. So it definitely is something that crosses their mind when they think of Toronto as a free agency destination. And let me just catch up here with some of the newer comments. What does a younger Norm do for us? So again, it's the sorry. Okay. Uh Again, the younger Norm thing is just kind of being flexible to free agency moving forward. I know it's not the best answer, but and it's not the most exciting answer, but obviously you're not going to have it this year. But with some of the upcoming free agency classes, I think the main thing with this move was Kawhi, excuse me. Masai didn't want to pay Norm. He has saw an opportunity to go get a player that can kind of give him similar contributions whilst, not breaking the bank on him. Obviously, you're not going to get those exact contributions from Gary Trent Jr. maybe this season in terms of what Norm was putting up, because we all saw it. Norm was absolutely balling this season. But moving forward in a year or two, well, hopefully in a year, because his restricted free agency is coming up, you do get a chance to see Gary Trent grow into a player that'll maybe be something akin to what Norman Powell was. Obviously, this is something I talk about on this channel a lot, but I think Toronto has some of the best player development in the NBA. I really think the Raptors, the Spurs, teams like that just do such a good job of internally, developing their own guys. And I think that's something teams like Toronto and San Antonio have to do, because neither of those teams are really quote unquote destinations in free agency as of now. So they do a good job kind of taking their own players and getting the absolute most out of them. And I think that's something that serves Toronto well. Holy hell. But to bring this all back to Kyle Lowry and even to Norm and to just today's day of the trade deadline, The Raptors are in a weird position going forward. They're not good enough to really compete for anything right now, and retaining Kyle is I don't want to say it's a questionable move because I think just having the legacy of Kyle in the locker room does go a long way. But when it comes to this offseason, again, are you going to pony up if Kyle Lowry wants 30 million? You just moved Norman Powell because you didn't want to pay him. And Norman Powell is younger and ascending and hitting his prime. While Kyle Lowry, as good as he still is, he's still a very good starter, is obviously, falling out of his prime and maybe, I don't know. I want to give Kyle some credit here. Maybe like 3 years away from retiring if Kyle Lowry wants to play until he's like 39. So do you really want to pony up for a 36-year-old free agent when you're a team looking to retool? I don't know. I I don't think so personally, but I guess we'll see in the offseason. As of now, today's grade for free agency overall. Sorry for free agency once again, excuse me. For the trade deadline overall, I'm gonna give the Raptors a C plus. I think I think the Norm trade could work out in the long run. I think today it's not, the most exciting trade in the world, but it could work out in the long run. I think dealing Matt Thomas and dealing Terrence Davis for essentially roster spots and second round picks and not landing that Kyle trade that you thought you could really drops the potential grade for me personally. It'll be interesting to see if the Raptors are players in the buyout market. I don't think they will be. Um, and to go back to Norm, I talked about this in the Norm video, but I will bring it up one more time. We had the report that the Pacers were willing to overpay for Norm. I think that would have been a more exciting situation because with the hole at the big man position for the Raptors, you had a chance to maybe go out and get somebody like Miles Turner if the Pacers were willing to part with him. And I think he would have been a fantastic addition to this team. But you get a younger Norm in Gary Trent Jr., which is fine. It's not exciting. We'll see if there are players in the buyout market. But as of now, I'm not expecting much from this Raptors season. Personally, I don't think anybody really should be. Their free agency plans will be interesting to watch because I don't think they're going to be huge players. I think they'll maybe make some more under the radar moves. Maybe they bring back DeMar DeRozan if they are going to be quote unquote big players. I think that's the big move that they could make. Or, and I'll end this off on a high note, maybe, just maybe, the Clippers really do suck this season. And there's a very outside chance that Kawhi decides to leave LA and come back. Like, if I had to put a percentage on it in terms of how likely that is to happen, 5%. But it's not happening. It is very, very unlikely, but you never know. You might as well dream a little bit, right? Other than that, yeah, just to bring it back again, if there's a grade on the day, I think it's a C plus for the Raptors. I think they could have done better. I think they thought they were going to do better, but I think they were asking for a little bit too much for Kyle. And in the long run, they price teams out of it, and Kyle just decided to stay on the roster. So, well, not that he decided, but he ended up staying on the roster. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in free agency. I think there's still a really good chance Kyle Lowry is out the door, but who knows? Obviously, you can't exactly go into the room and know exact what's on Masai's mind. But hey, Gary Trent Jr. is not a bad return. Again, I actually really like the way you put that there, even though I kind of John Doe, I hear like the whole Bruno Caboclo thing in the back of my head when I hear that Gary's 2 years away from being Norm. uh, yeah, I mean, not a horrible way to put it. He has a lot of the same things that Norm does in terms of his defense, in terms of, you know, his shooting as a shot creator. Maybe he's not quite on the same level yet, but he can get there. So I was gonna end this stream, but I see a lot of new comments pouring in. So you know what? I'm gonna keep it going for a little bit. I'm not gonna lie to you folks. My throat is getting dry as all hell. So you know what? Let me take a drink of water, and I'm gonna answer some of these comments I have coming in. Okay. Uh, Carlos, just to go back, I did talk about this at the beginning of the stream or midway through the stream. What do I think of Gary Trent? I think he's a very good player. I think he's had a good season with Portland. I think he's going to get better. I think he has a chance to be, frankly enough, be a similar player to Norm. But yeah, it was a move for cap flexibility. They didn't want to pay Norm. That's what I would guess. All right, let's see what else we have. Excuse me if I butcher the pronunciation here, but Shahir, why is Lowry staying? Um, I honestly, as I talked about, I think Masai was probably asking for too much, and you saw teams back away. You saw the Sixers back away and pursue George Hill. You saw the Miami Heat back away and pursue obviously Victor Oladipo. You saw the Clippers back away, not that they were ever really in a huge position, but you saw the Clippers back away and they went and got out Jesus, Rajon Rondo, which I think is quietly a really nice deal for them, by the way. And then you had LA back away, and I would assume they're going to be players in the buyout market. I haven't seen any reports about any other trades that the Lakers have made, but I think Masai was asking for too much. I think he, by all means, wanted to get a deal done today, but I think the asking price is too much, and now you're running the risk of losing Kyle Lowry in free agency for nothing. So it happens, but we'll see how the situation develops. I honestly, I think this is so contingent on what happens in the offseason, but I do think there's a big chance that Kyle Lowry at this stage in his career is going to go join a contender in the offseason. But we'll see. Let's see. Gary Trent Jr. and Tyler Hero, the same thing. I don't think they're necessarily the same thing. I can see where you're coming from. I think their skill set is somewhat similar. Um, Actually, right on cue. Yeah, Hero is exactly what I was going to say. I think Hero is a bit better of a shot creator than Gary Trent Jr. is. I think Gary Trent Jr. is more of just natural spot up shooter, which we have actually seen Tyler Hero struggle with his 3-point shot this season. He's shooting 31%, I believe, last time I checked, on just a lot of shots taken. So he is slumping a little bit, but I think Tyler Hero overall, given the opportunity, could have really grown with the Raptors system, which is why I made the video personally earlier in the year, hoping that the Raptors were going to pursue Tyler Hero. The difference to me between Tyler Hero and Gary Trent Jr. is, I think, really the ceiling of these players. I think Gary Trent Jr. has a very good chance to be a good player in the NBA. I think in a best case scenario, he's going to be a borderline star, depending on what your definition of a star is. With Tyler Hero, and again, I think he truly does have the ceiling of being a superstar. I don't necessarily, every time I say this, I have to kind of put the asterisk, if you want to call it, of I don't necessarily think he's 100% going to get there, but I think in the right situation, with the right coaching, with the right offensive system, I think Harrow is somebody that could be developed enough to really solve a lot of problems for the Raptors in terms of potentially having that star that's just a great shot creator. I think Harrow could have done that for this team. So I am really sad to see the Raptors miss out. I think, let me put it this way. A lot of Raptors fans really liked Bradley Beal, right? I think Tyler Harrow's ceiling is something akin to Bradley Beal. Again, that's not me saying that he's going to be a Beal in the future. That's just me saying in the right situation, he has the opportunity. And I think with this deadline, you wanted to gamble on those kinds of opportunities, and the Heat just weren't willing to part with him, which is totally a fair call on Pat Riley's part. I mean, they didn't part with Tyler Hero for James Harden, so I guess it was a little tough to see, maybe in retrospect, them parting with Tyler Hero to get Kyle Lowry. Oof. All right. Let's see. What else do we have here? Yeah, no, that's unless you folks have any other like incoming questions, I think for the most part, I have shared my thoughts on this deadline. I do completely agree that Masai with John Doe, that Masai did gamble and he lost this time, similar to how he gambled where he thought big free agents were going to be on the board for this offseason and they didn't happen to. So he lost on that gamble. Although I think that's more of a fair gamble, if you ask me. Whereas this one is just kind of, it's whatever. Let's see. I see some other things coming in. Are we tanking now that we traded TD and Norm? I don't know if we're tanking. I don't think this group it has the personalities to be tanking. Um, I think the COVID situation really put the Raptors obviously in a bad spot where I think their intention was to kind of compete and get into the playoffs originally. And they were doing well, obviously, before the COVID outbreaks. There were times where they got as high as I believe it was the 4 seed was the highest they got in the standings. And they obviously ended up dropping down, obviously, on this huge winning streak, losing streak because of the COVID situation, because of missing so many key pieces, which, you know, when you're missing 3 of your 5 starters, you're not going to play great. I think the Raptors are going to try to compete for the playoff spots. I think, in all likelihood, the most likely scenario that I see happening from this season is the Raptors get to like the 10 seed and they put themselves in a position to be in the play-in tournament. Do they make the playoffs ultimately? I don't know. I don't. If I'm being quite frank about it, I don't honestly think it makes a difference. I think this season is more about getting players for the future and potentially making a big play in the upcoming draft, where you have around 7, 8, 9, however many you think potential game changing and franchise altering talents. I've said it before. Evan Mobley is the guy that I think the Raptors should be looking at, but there's so many talented guys there. Obviously, Kuminga is a guy that I personally really like. You have Suggs in this draft. You have obviously Cade Cunningham at the top of the draft if the balls drop the right way for the Raptors. So I think the draft is going to be the focus of this season moving forward, but I don't think this group is going to intentionally tank by any means. I'm going to take a sip of water. Bear with me while I read the next comments. Let's talk. Let's see. DeMar, Serge, and Lowry signing back with the Raptors next season. Norm leaving opened a spot back up for DeMar. Um, I don't think so. I think Serge at this point wants to be a role player, in particular on championship contending teams, and I think LA is a good situation for him there. Obviously, he would have more of a featured role here in Toronto, and he'd be scoring more points. But if I had to put a guess on it, I think his priorities lie with potentially competing for championships and winning. I think you saw that when he took a pay cut to go join the Clippers. So I don't think he's coming back. DeMar's a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised, and it would be really funny. I would pay any kind of money to see, if DeMar came back, to see the first like face-to-face moment between Masai Ujiri and DeMar DeRozan in that locker room. um, but I don't think that's where the priority is. Again, I think the Raptors, with what their roster is looking like, should be thinking towards moving up in the draft to potentially get a game changer. But you never know what's going to happen with this offseason. They obviously have a lot of cap space, so they can go in a lot of different directions. Let's see. Uh, John Doe says that he would rather have Powell than DeRozan. At this point in their careers, that's interesting. I do think, as good as Powell has been this season, I do think DeMar is the better player, right? Like right this second. But obviously, Powell is younger, still has more room to grow. So I guess it depends on what you prefer and what kind of situation you want to be putting your team in. I thought retaining Powell in this offseason wasn't necessarily, the worst move for the Raptors. Like, I've talked about this with Clutch Takes on the last pod we did over on his channel, but I know a lot of Raptors fans love the idea of like getting Victor Oladipo potentially, and it was even something I was considering at the start of this season. But at this point in their careers, Norman Powell's a better player than Victor Oladipo by every stretch of the imagination, if you ask me. So, when it came to that, where like Raptors fans were talking about, hey, why don't we go get Depot? And I'm just like, but we already have a better player than Depot. So I don't know. Um, if it comes down specifically to DeMar and Powell, obviously Powell still has room to grow and would be a better asset in terms of his future potential and growing with the team. But DeMar is still a better player now. I do think that is the case. And let's see. Uh, Matthew Coombs, I want to say is how you pronounce that last name. He thinks that we won't even get a top 10 pick. Uh, uh yeah, I mean it's a possibility that we don't. If the Raptors do plan on competing for the rest of the season, there's a good chance that their draft position gets worse and worse, which is not really an exciting thought. I think I think whatever happens in the season, I'm gonna hold my faith in the fact that Masai Ujiri is gonna make a trade to move up in the draft, no matter where our positioning is. So if that gives you any consolation to the Raptors potentially sneaking into the playoffs and losing draft position, I would honestly expect a GM sorry, not a GM. I would expect, because Bobby's the GM. But anyways, I would expect Masai to be aggressive in this draft. It's one of the best draft classes that has been talked about in many seasons. So I don't think Masai Ujiri is going to waste the opportunity to move up in the draft should he get that chance. And yep, I to go with the latest comment, uh, Ice Funny, I think it is. Uh, we did kind of trade Matt Thomas and Terrence Davis for nothing. The second round picks aren't really that exciting to me. And like Matt Thomas, I can live with. You can tell Nick Nurse isn't the biggest fan of Matt Thomas because he doesn't really get that many minutes. He's really a specialist in certain situations, or when guys are out of the lineup, Matt Thomas finds his way into the rotation. Like Matt Thomas just doesn't give you enough on the court outside of, just his shooting. So I'm okay with seeing him go. They need to clear up an extra roster spot, I believe, for Rodney Hood, anyways. But Terrence Davis kind of sucks to just see him go for a second round pick. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to leave my personal feelings out of this because, with the whole charges that he has on him, despite them being dropped, I don't want to get into that. I personally don't endorse any player that, puts his hands on a woman. But again, leaving that out of it, just as a basketball player himself, Terrence Davis, does have the potential to be, at his best, I think a very good six man for a team. So it did kind of suck to see him go just for a second round pick, but I don't know. Again, that goes back to the whole thing where I think Masai showed his hand. He expected, a big blockbuster trade to go down where he was clearing up roster spots for potential extra players coming in from the Lakers or from the Heat. And then it never happened, right? Other than that, folks, unless you have any last minute questions for me right now to answer, I'm probably going to call it for this live stream. My throat is hella dry for talking for about like 45 minutes straight. So I do think that's going to do it for me today. Once again, I'm going to repeat myself. If there's a grade on the day, I think it's a C plus for the Raptors. Trent is a nice add, but not moving Kyle at this deadline could bite Toronto in the ass in the future. Other than that, folks, if you're new here, like and subscribe to the channel. It goes a long way, and I really appreciate it. Hopefully, you've enjoyed listening to me ramble my thoughts on the Raptors. I've enjoyed kind of just doing this little back and forth with the comment section. It was really fun. And other than that, I I am done here for the day.